Vivek, thank you so much for being on the program. Sorry, I try as hard as I can to not bring on presidential candidates talking about illicit drug use and bumping parties inside of the White House. I don't think that's a great lead-in, but since you are someone who wants to clean up this mess, maybe you could just start by telling me, if you were president, would you reorder an investigation into whose cocaine bag this was?
Benny, this is a reminder of almost what the COVID lab leak story sounded like when it first came out, right? There's a bioterrorism lab in Wuhan, China, that works on engineering viruses that are designed to be infectious. It leaks into the world from China, but you can't say that it came from a lab in Wuhan until 3 years later when you finally meekly admit that, yeah, the thing that was kind of obvious at the time came to light and be true. It's that story. We see that all over again, repeating itself in every sphere of American life. That's what this story reminds me of as well. You did a pretty good job of laying out why it should be as obvious where this cocaine came from as it was that the COVID-19 virus originated in a lab in Wuhan, but it takes us somehow 3 years to get to the truth of the matter. I was going to give a more sympathetic account of it, Benny, as I thought maybe Hunter was just being a good son to his dad and helping him with his presidential debate prep, which is what they might have been doing in the White House. But regardless, I think it's relatively obvious why they've been so opaque about the reality. And I was actually, as you were talking, Benny, I was also reminded, you and I were walking the streets of Kensington. You might remember when we talked to somebody who was one of the drug users on the street there about the so-called aid efforts. And we asked what was wrong with it. They said, actually, the aid efforts are literally giving out needles and crack pipes on the street. And so perhaps it's possible that Hunter has also been put in charge of that aid program to cities across the country. I think he would be fitting to give away the crack pipes like many in the government aid programs are doing now. But all joking aside, this is just a sad symptom of how deep the rot runs, not just in the federal government, but in our culture of accountability in this country. And that's a big part of what I'm looking to change by hopefully winning the next election.
So this is obviously a line of questioning that's really important to my audience, which is accountability. And nobody is asking for political persecutions. Everyone's against that. By nature, we're against going after and censoring the left. We don't want to go after them just based on what they believe. That's immoral. That's wrong. However, if you do break the law, you should be held accountable. It doesn't matter what letters behind your name. And what you saw with Christopher Wray yesterday is that nobody seems at all interested in holding the Bidens into account for their crimes. Can you talk me through a Ramaswamy administration? What would you believe? How would you begin to set the universe right with a little justice?
I think that this is inherently a predictable feature of the bureaucracy, Benny. When you have bureaucracies that should have never existed in the first place, that is a formula. It's a cesspool that it's almost like a law of physics. It will get you corruption because when people show up to work who should have never had that job, they find things to do in the way that they deem fit. So the people who we elect to run the government now are, first of all, let's just establish the obvious. They're not the ones who actually run the government. This managerial class that runs the show in the permanent state today has decided that for now, when they believe that there's a decent chance that Trump will be the nominee for the Republican Party, they've decided that they need to actually hold out this puppet that beat him once. That's their best chance of doing it again to keep the permanent state intact. That's what they're going to do. Now, I believe I'm going to be the nominee for the Republican Party. You mark my words, if and when I am the nominee, they're not going to let Biden run against me. So that's when this probe comes out, be it the cocaine in the White House, be it the classified documents probe against Biden that they've more or less sidelined. They're keeping that. And so I think what's going to happen is this even goes beyond partisanship, Benny. It's not just that if you're on the left, you're politically favored and on the right, you're not. That's how it appears today. That's how it's playing out. But it runs deeper than that. It is a permanent state that decides who is and isn't the people who actually sit in seats like the White House. So what am I doing to change that under my administration? I think the first step is I can't promise you that I will reform that bureaucracy. Other Republicans will make that promise. I won't, because that is a false promise. I don't think one human being can do it. This bureaucracy has existed for long before. It'll exist for long after, unless we do the one thing that the president can do: shut it down. What I've said is that I've offered a clear plan for how we will close the FBI. Christopher Wray is not the problem. He is a symptom of the problem. The problem is a J. Edgar Hoover FBI. It's actually a great book my wife and I are reading right now. It's called G-Man. The guy it stands for Government Man. It's a book about J. Edgar Hoover and the history of that institution. This is just the modern puppet in the tradition of J. Edgar Hoover. This was a bureaucracy that was built that should have never existed in the first place. At the local level, you have local prosecutors and local police. You don't have a giant investigative unit sitting in between. Well, in the federal government, we have the U.S. Marshals, which, as best as I can tell, is not yet a deeply corrupt political institution. And then you've got prosecutors, but you don't need this separate FBI sitting in between. And so when that bureaucracy exists, and Benny, I've visited Washington, D.C. It is still the J. Edgar Hoover building of the FBI that these agents and these staff walk into every day. You can't make this stuff up. The right answer is I will, on strong constitutional and statutory authority, shutter that institution. It will not exist under my watch in office. And that's how we actually end a corruption that, by the way, in the 1960s, was threatening Martin Luther King with suicide using tapes that they illegally collected, that's now going after its different political opponents while leaving the Hunter Bidens of the world and the Joe Bidens of the world untouched. And so this is a deeper trans-temporal problem. It goes beyond just the moment we're in. This is a problem over the last generation in our country. And I think I'm the single presidential candidate in the last decade, in the last probably 30 years, who has the deepest understanding of how to actually shut down that administrative state, including the police state, starting with the FBI.
What an incredible answer. I'll have like a couple follow-ups to that, but first off, that is truly alpha. Way to go. I mean, it is an executive order that is done, executive orders that are done by the pen can be undone by the pen.
Yes.
The FBI is just an executive order. Now, it's also completely and totally unconstitutional. Madison and Jefferson had this whole argument about whether the president should have police powers. And they both decided together that that would be wrong. And that's actually how Europe went the way that the chaos that spiraled Europe into a century of darkness, because kings had police power.
Yeah.
And so they actually removed that, and we somehow added it in 100 years later. It's totally and completely wrong. I want to start with something on the follow-ups to what you just said. You said that they're holding back the charges against Biden. And if somebody is able to challenge Trump, or if Trump is not able to be the candidate, then they'll swap Biden.
Yes.
They'll suddenly come down on him instantly and just get him out.
Yes.
That's wild.
That's exactly what's going to happen. That's exactly what's going to happen.
Okay.
So, Benny, I'm in this race. I believe I will be the nominee. That's why I'm taking the great pains of running for U.S. president. That's for the people to decide, not me. But if I am the nominee, you mark my words, they will not let Joe Biden run against me. The juxtaposition would be too stark. They know that it would be a landslide election, and they will then fret to say their puppet has outlived his purpose. So the first thing they'll do is they'll get him behind closed doors and say, listen up, old man, it's time to move aside. Now, Joe Biden at times, when he's at least in his more lucid moments, can be a stubborn man. I think what they're going to do is lord over him then the documents case, the cocaine case, the dirt they have on his son. They know that that's close to Joe Biden's heart, and that's going to be their leverage to make sure they put up the next puppet who then meets the moment against a guy like me. Maybe someone like Michelle Obama or Gavin Newsom. That's who they'll put up against someone like me. That's exactly what's coming. Now, they're not going to need to exercise that leverage if Donald Trump's the nominee, because the way they see it is, okay, this is their best chance now. We tried it once. The old man puppet did it once. Maybe we can put up the old man puppet to do it again. But that is how the administrative state plays its game. It is something that goes beyond partisanship. This is almost deeper than actually a Democrat versus Republican issue. This is about who actually governs the United States of America. Is it the people who we elect to run the government, or is it, and I love the way you put it, Benny, it's refreshing for me to actually have a conversation with a guy who knows a thing or two about history that goes beyond even the birth of our country. Is it the old world European model? Is it that we cannot trust the people of this country, the citizens of a nation, to self-govern, but that a more enlightened class must actually determine those answers instead? The unelected class, the bureaucrats. In old world Europe, it was the monarch. It was a group of labor leaders and church leaders that got together behind closed doors in the back of palace halls, deciding what was right for the rest of society at large. Today, that is the managerial class in the administrative state and the woke industrial complex that spans the administrative state and their cronies in the private sector that determine, no, the people of this country cannot be trusted, Democrat or Republican. It's we, the enlightened class, that have to decide what's right for the rest of society at large. That's the way they're playing this game. Now, you mark my words, if I'm the U.S. president, I understand that if somebody works for me and I can't fire them, that means they don't work for me. It means I work for them because I'm responsible for what they do without any authority to change it. And I refuse to be that puppet in the White House. I've been a CEO. I think it takes an outsider to get this job done. A professional career politician cannot do it. I think the donor class is, largely the mega donor class is in on the game. And I reject that game. So I think that I've studied this, and we can get into the legal details if you're interested, on strong constitutional and statutory authority. And the good news is, one of the great things to celebrate about President Trump's accomplishments was he gave us a great Supreme Court that understands the Constitution and stands for it. This Supreme Court agrees with my views on this. We will go in, and I'm not just going to reform the Department of Education or the FBI. It's a false promise. I will not just fire the figurehead on top. That's just a game. It's a charade. I will shut it down. I will make sure we do get sued. Of course we'll get sued by the people who are fired. We then take that to the Supreme Court, the great Supreme Court that Trump helped create for this country. We then win. And that's how, for the next guy that takes over after I'm leaving the White House, I'm out in January 2033. That's how we actually drive change on the timescale of history, because the next guy won't have his hands tied in the same way mine are. And just as I'm a little bit more free than Trump was because he actually gave us the Supreme Court we have now. That's how we drive change on the scales of history.
Now, you're already seeing this from the FBI's official accounts. I've never seen anything like it. The FBI's official account at FBI, verified, little silver check mark, was live tweeting the hearing. That's how terrified they were of that hearing yesterday. Never seen anything like it. Such a beta move. And such fear. You can sense it, like the fear that they have. And here's what they were tweeting, and I'm just going to throw this argument at you. Yeah. This is what you're going to get here. Oh, but the FBI does good work. They solved this crime or that crime, and they saved this bunny and this cat from a tree. And so you need to keep the FBI because the cat and the tree and the bunny.
It's interesting. The PR element of this, Benny, if you study the history on this, it's actually not as new as you'd think. You go back to J. Edgar Hoover. What was his top? I'm looking at the tweets now that you got up there.
Yeah.
In the modern form, we do it in the form of tweets. Back in Hoover's day, they used to do it in the form of movies, working with Hollywood. So this guy, corrupt guy into whose shadow the FBI was actually built. I almost had a Freudian slip and said FDA. It kind of has a parallel problem in that organization too, which I have my own thoughts on how I'm going to shutter 75% of the employees over there. But in the FBI, we'll close the whole thing. Is even Hoover, when he led it, where did he spend most of his attention? His attention, the top dog, was on the PR of that institution, to actually spread the PR of all the good things they were doing, of purging, and back then the communists in the country as part of the Red Scare that they used to justify their own grab of power, dominion, and control. So in a certain sense, that live tweet that you're seeing today, that live tweeting stream during yesterday's hearing, it's, again, nothing more than the tradition of J. Edgar Hoover, the G-man, the government man, that actually built the institution, the namesake of the building of the headquarters of the FBI today, that literally is the same corrupt institution that it was always set up to be. And when you have a beast that deep, Benny, you can't tame the beast. The beast will strike back and devour you. You have to slay that beast. We cannot reform the administrative state. We cannot tame the Leviathan. We have to shut it down. And when I say that, it makes a lot of people, I've had this experience, Benny. I can read to you if I had the time, I'd search my phone to read you some of the texts I've gotten from would-be donors telling me, hey, listen, what you're saying, you might want to tame it because people, they'll tell me stuff like this. I'm just being really open with you, right? So these are billionaire type friends, and say, hey, I know you have to talk this way to win a primary, but I know you don't really mean it, but maybe you can actually just be a little bit more reasonable so that the friends I'm talking to don't think you're a crazy man. I'm actually perfectly sane in terms of understanding the constitutional footing here. But what I tell them is, no, actually, I do mean it. And this is exactly what we're going to see through. And I'd love to have your support, because we're going to need everybody's support to get there. But this is actually what I stand for. And I can educate you on why this is going to be necessary. And then I walk them through, look, the DEA is pursuing some of the same cases as the FBI is in parallel. Why do we need an FBI? The U.S. Marshals are just enforcing the law rather than actually serving as this actual federal police state, which our founding fathers never wanted us to have. And even some of those, I would say, initially scared Republicans, maybe they're not telling me the truth and maybe they're just indulging me, but actually say, okay, well, I guess I didn't see it that way. That's my job for this country, is to take what now is considered to be an extreme course of action, shutting down the unconstitutional fourth branch of the government, and waking us up to see, actually, this was the original vision of the country in the first place, the vision, the ideals that we all share in common of self-governance over aristocracy, part of what unites us as Americans. And the foreign idea, the crazy idea, was the idea that we ever had an unelected class that wielded the power they do today. That's my job. And I think that as the young guy in this race, as a fresh millennial voice, as somebody who's never been in government, coming in as an outsider, having had success in the private sector, that's my responsibility to take what seems strange, but actually to remind everyone that that was actually what was familiar at our core. It's part of what makes us American, that we believe in actual self-governance by we the people, rather than by this special appointed class of the federal administrative police state.
The beautiful thing about I don't know how old you are. I'm 37, and I've lived, unfortunately, through like Bush 1 and 2,
yep,
Mitt Romney, John McCain, and before the internet, and before Twitter, before Facebook and YouTube and Rumble, it was very easy to lie to people. Yep. It was very easy to say something, be totally disingenuous about it, right? I'm George Bush. I'm pro-life, right? No, you're not. No, you're not. You haven't ever once said anything about Roe v. Wade being overturned. You're a liar. Yep. You lied. You didn't speak to the March for Life, dude. It was across the street from the White House, and you never once in 8 years went and spoke to them. You're lying to us. Mm-hmm. It's amazing how quickly in the modern era you can call out the liars. And that's totally why, keep talking the way that you're talking.
I appreciate that, man.
Resonating with people.
I'm 37. We're the same age.
37, actually. Okay.
And we grew up into this. We grew up into this era. I was a Bush skeptic at the time. I mean, like you, actually, even people in the Republican Club back in college used to push back on me when I was arguing against the Patriot Act, passed far outside of constitutional authority, arguing against the ways in which the bailouts played out. These were Republican ideas then. So, I mean, people like you and I, Benny, we're not political partisans. I think we stand for first principles, and I think our generation hopefully can wake up to the fact that this isn't about red versus blue. This is about what it means to be an American.
Because you're running. Okay, so it's fascinating to me because you're the first person, and you're the only person. You're the youngest person in the Republican field right now. Yeah. There's 279 declared candidates, and you know, and they have multiple lifetimes worth of political experience on you. Yeah. But Nikki Haley ain't taken off. Tim Scott ain't taken. These people have been in politics their entire life. They ain't taken off. Mike Pence. And now you're fighting DeSantis for the number 2 spot. I mean, you're up there. You are within striking distance of being number 2 in the entire in Republican polling, because I would argue your authenticity. Thank you. Comments on this.
I appreciate that. I think we're just getting warmed up. I'm looking forward to the debate. The first debate's in late August. One of the things, Benny, is I'd never had a political donor in my life because I've never run for office. So the way it usually works is you start out with these donor lists. That's where you initially get the donors. So they've set this debate threshold at 40,000 unique donors. We've already crossed 65,000 when actually many governors and senators, even some of the people you mentioned, are complaining that the 40,000 threshold is too high. So I'm gratified by it. One of the things that's cool about it, Benny, is 30% of our donors are first-time ever donors to a Republican candidate or Republican cause of any kind. And usually that number for a GOP candidate is 2%. And that just goes to my theme that this labeling battle between Republicans and Democrats, I mean, George Bush was a nominal Republican, but you and I, when we were, let's just say in our 20s back then, or in our late teens and early 20s, we were on the same side of principle against a guy who was really just a hollowed out husk of the same establishment that now puts up Joe Biden as its puppet. And so I think when we're able to talk about this in ways that go beyond, are you black or are you white, or are you Democrat or are you Republican? But just take a step back and ask ourselves, what do we fight a revolution in 1776 for? What does that flag behind you actually mean? Yes, it's a piece of cloth, but what does it actually stand for? You ask somebody our age, what does it mean to be an American? You get a blank stare in response. Well, let's fill that void. Let's have a conversation today about what are those principles that define what it means to be an American today. It means we are sovereign. It means that we don't bow to some autocrat, be it foreign or domestic. It means we believe in prosperity without apology. It means we are, yes, proud of what we call American exceptionalism, the best ideals known to a free society that give hope to the free world. Those aren't Republican or Democrat ideas, but that's what moves me in this race. And honest to God, I would rather speak the truth at every step of the way and lose some election than to play some political snakes and ladders and figure out how to sit as a hollowed out husk in the White House like the guy we have there now. What's the point of going through the motions? And so we'll find out whether that's a successful electoral strategy or not. My bet is it will be, but we'll see.
Final question I have, and it sort of fish hooks into what you were just talking about, is this viral clip of you engaging with a pro-abortion woman who came to just scream at you in Iowa, right? And you can go check it out on social media. There's a lot of screaming, not by Vivek, but by the protester in this clip. So it'll just play beside you. Please check it out online. It's done millions of views. Effectively, this protester came and yelled at Vivek, and Vivek was able to diffuse the situation and actually have a nice conversation with her, and then turn the entire room into applauding for her. And she weeps and walks out. Talk me through this remarkable moment.
Well, it bothered me a little bit so there's someone screaming in the back. First, I thought usually if there's people screaming at our events, usually they're like super fans. And she said, protect women, when I was talking about the U.S. military. And I'm like, yes, absolutely. And there's a lot of things going wrong in our military, as you and I well know. But then I realized that, no, this is a woman who's disagreeing with me on grounds of abortion. She started saying, my body, my choice. I was actually attending a historic day in Iowa the following day where they were signing into law a special, anti-abortion law that I fully support. But anyway, that was why she was there as a protester. But then the security started to actually guide her out because she was screaming at the top of her lungs and you couldn't even really make out what she was saying. I got a sense that it was a pro-choice protester and they were just guiding her out of the building. And I was like, no. This is not the way I want this to end. Okay, I'm an advocate for free speech. What does it mean to advocate for free speech? What does it mean to be an American? It means that we get to disagree in the open. So I told her, I had the microphone. I said, bring her back in. And I gave her the floor and said, you get to ask me a question, and I promise you I'll respond to it. And what was the most striking thing about it, Benny, is she started screaming at me about my body, my choice. My takeaway from it, it wasn't totally clear because she was very emotional, but my sense from it, my strong sense was based on the things she said. She had undergone maybe rape, certainly had a man who was not in her life anymore. She said had put that baby into me. So the way she framed it suggested that it was rape or something like it. And she brought a child into this world. But then I let her speak. I didn't interrupt her. And as she started speaking, you know what she started saying? She started saying, and my daughter is successful. That was the word she used, is successful. And she said that over and over again. And I don't want to be looked down upon. And that was so interesting to me because the choice she made was to bring her daughter into this world. And now she wants to tell an audience of people in the room in Iowa and remind them that her daughter is successful and she doesn't want to be looked down upon. To me, that sounds like a pro-life message, right? And so my only question was, I asked her just to confirm because it was hard to understand. I said, are you a mother today? She said, yes, I am. And then the whole room applauded for her. And she broke down in tears because she didn't want to be looked down upon. She wasn't looked down upon in that room. She was celebrated for being a mother. And I just think it shows the power of having an open conversation in this country. It's not always going to have a happy ending, but we can disagree with one another. But our right to air our disagreements is part of what makes us American. And occasionally we might discover, even as you and I did as we walked the streets of Kensington, that we may not disagree nearly as much with the people around us as we thought if we're actually willing to have the conversation.
It really was a demonstration that hurt people, and that the cycle of brokenness in our society needs to be stopped somewhere. It's like somebody needs to stand up and stop it. And that's where a lot of this comes from. These people carry a lot of bitterness in their hearts. They're not happy individuals. It's not a happy movement. If you spend any time around leftists, and I do, I go to their protests, I get screamed at, spit on, like, and I know you do too. Like, they're not actually happy people.
No.
What we saw in Kensington was not happy, without people living a joyful, prosperous life. It was a lot of brokenness, a lot of pain that defines this movement. And it needs people to stand up and be optimistic about it. We try as hard as we can to white pill people on this show, and red pill people, and not be doomers. And your candidate's attracting, as you just said, like a entirely new generation. And we think that's awesome. What's the best way for people to find what you're up to, what you're doing? I think we have your socials to toss on screen.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, Vivek2024.com is our website. So VIVEK2024.com. In my views, this is a grassroots movement. You know, yes, I have put 15 plus million of my own money into the campaign precisely because I don't want to rely on mega donors. But the thing that's going to lift us up are volunteers across this country. We're seeing them starting to come in droves. We actually launched this new program, Benny, which you might appreciate, which actually says, if you want to help us raise money, instead of me using the professional fundraising class who goes to Silicon Valley and Palm Beach and gets to keep 10% of what they bundle and raise, I said, let's just make that available to everybody. So in the last few days, we've had 1,000 people sign up for that program. It's my kitchen cabinet is what we call it. You help us raise money, small dollars. You get to keep 10%. It's like Joe Biden said, 10% for the big guy. I say 10% for the little guy. And you know, we're going to have some fun with this along the way too. So if people make some money on it, great. Help us fundraise. I think that's a way that we can both have fun, but also do something that's actually important in getting us across the finish line here.
Really, really impressive and interesting stuff. And one of the more, you and RFK, man, are the like fascinating candidates that no one's ever seen before coming out in 2024. It's changing a lot of things, and we're thankful for it. Vivek, appreciate it. Godspeed.
Thank you, Ben.